Thank you very much, gentlemen. For a quick introduction, we have Don Dudek, who's a director at Desert Gold, Senegal-Mali border for gold. We'll touch on that. We have Errol Smart from Orion, CEO at Orion Minerals, currently running a copper project in Namibia. We have Dr. Russell Scrimshaw, Peak Rare Earths Chairman, looking at Tanzania rare earths right now. Jed Richardson from Trigon Metals in copper in Namibia, and then to add a bit of thing in the mix, Farhad Abasov for Millennial Potash with the project in Gabon currently, chairman as well. Thank you very much for joining me. Just to pick up on some of the things I brought up, we talk a lot about the competition and whether it's a good thing for Africa or a bad thing for Africa. I thought we'd start maybe with Russell, because you're doing rare earths, and that's at the center of the competition between China and the US, but I think you've also spent some time in China, Russell, so if you can give us a sense of, is this good or bad for Africa?
Thank you. Yes, I think I've been to China over 100 times, actually. With my 10 years at Fortescue Metals Group at the beginning. Look, geopolitically, Africa's right in the middle of everything that's going on, and I think it's worthwhile stepping back and trying to understand what is happening across the world. And when you look at things like artificial intelligence, you look at networks, you look at crypto, you look at green energy, etc., I think we're on the verge of the biggest mining boom we've ever seen in the history of the world. The amount of compute power needed to drive AI, for example, is orders of magnitude higher than we've ever seen before. What does that mean? It means that we need an awful lot of copper, we need an awful lot of rare earths, we need an awful lot of other critical minerals, and green energy. So the opportunity for Africa is just incredible. But of course, we need the right geopolitical climate, and we need governments of all persuasion in Africa to understand the true opportunity that's there. So we are on the verge of an incredible mining boom, but it's only going to happen if the governments of Africa, in this example, understand what can be achieved from this, and they work close hand in hand with the mining companies.
Thank you. Thank you, Russell. I mean, as you say, there's a massive capacity that it feels like the investors aren't quite lining up yet to finance the capacity that we actually need to get out of the ground to realize this transition. And there's energy transition on top of that, right? All the renewables that require on the copper, Errol and Jed, you're both looking at copper, and that's one of the markets that's really competitive on the China-US side, right? What are your observations maybe from Tanzania? Maybe Jed first and then Errol.
Sure. For Trigon, we're in an interesting position where we are exploring, but we are in production. So we're producing a small amount of copper in Namibia with a growing growth profile. Namibia, I think, is in a pretty unique position. It's a very attractive destination for investment. It is kind of in that South African web around Southern Africa, and I think that if we're going to be talking about geopolitics in Africa, I think something we all need to understand is the differences of the different regions. And South Africa is the S in BRICS, which kind of puts it in a unique place, but it is also part of the Commonwealth and also very friendly to the West. And I think that puts for a critical mineral like copper, us in a special position, developing projects in that in this jurisdiction where you have an opportunity. Like, for instance, our concentrate does go to China. However, we're still we're still very easily able to raise capital in Western jurisdictions and still potentially deliver product to the West in a world that seems to be breaking up. Africa has a number of these opportunities where we can straddle both sides of the geopolitical spectrum.
Thanks, Jed. Yeah, I think Namibia has been the darling of African investment, right? Because it's got just the right position for now. Let's hope that holds. They don't get greedy. Sorry, I said Tanzania before, but we're talking about Namibia. Do you find, Errol, that it's easier to do that because it's Namibia to get the financing? And to Jed's point, they say they're selling in China. Do you see this going, or are you worried that this is going in a direction where sort of you have to align investment with offtake as well to be able to navigate this situation?
Yeah, of course, we focused in the Northern Cape in South Africa, so we're not in Namibia. We're right in the boiling pot, South Africa. But it strikes me that the more things change, the more they stay the same. Africa has been colonized for millennia, produce minerals for other jurisdictions. And unfortunately, that's still the truth. And there's a lot of initiatives at the moment to change that and look at local beneficiation, all of that. The talk is cheap. That's large capital and funding to change that landscape. For now, African governments and the companies that are operating in those jurisdictions have become political football. And you've really got four powerhouses around the world, and two of them are aligned. So you've got this US, EU bloc that are actively investing and trying to secure supply chains for the critical minerals. You've got China, massive player, and then the new emerging bloc here out of the Middle East. And countries are aligning themselves with trading blocs. And unfortunately, because it's polarizing, once you've aligned yourself in one place, it's very difficult to jump fence. You get countries like South Africa that try to play in every field, and that's going to be interesting to see how well they play it. Companies also are going to have that challenge. You know, we've got to choose our offtake. At the end of the day, once we've got a certain suite of investors or a certain suite of off-takers, we might actually sterilize ourselves to other investors. And the junior mining world, at the end of the day, we have to raise capital from wherever we can get it, because it's a damn tough game to do. And part of that funding process is the offtake. And all of that is becoming very polarized. And I see that slide that you had on earlier on, the red lines. Well, those red lines are moving, and we all need to be very aware of them. But CEOs of junior exploration and mining companies, developers, have been forced to become politicians. We need to understand these risks, because the decisions we make now will actually change our futures.
That's exactly our advice to companies as well. Unfortunately, it is a geopolitical game that we're playing as well. Maybe not for gold. I don't know. Is gold a bit sort of outside of this landscape, done and a bit more easy to get about when it comes to geopolitics?
I think gold does have a different environment. One is, you don't have to worry about supply chain, right? A gold bar, a couple of them would be put in a suitcase and moved to whatever country. The biggest issue for us as a junior explorer is investment capital. Africa is viewed as a land of opportunity. There are a lot of projects. To find a 1 to 2 million ounce plus gold project is feasible. I've been involved in West Africa since 2008. And I find, from a discovery point of view, I can find more faster for less capital in West Africa than I can anywhere else that I've worked. And I've worked in many different countries over my career. But our challenge is to get investors that are interested in that environment and balancing that with risk. And I think the best opportunity for junior companies and for companies like ourselves is, pointing to situations where companies have done well, have done the right things, have managed to work with governments to get a partnership going where both the companies and the investors and the country share the rewards equally. We've had to, as our company, take a path where we're looking at a small mine production to finance the future, to reduce the burdens on investors, and to improve confidence in the country or in the company. And we hope that this is the best scenario for us to use.
Thank you. Just moving on, I'll come back to this topic because I think it's interesting to look at if the investment landscape will change. But just to touch on potash, because there in our circles, there's conversation around whether what is the next supply chain that's going to be defined as critical supply chain. And I think as we've seen with the Ukraine-Russia conflict, potash has become a very hot topic for a while, immediately as the conflict developed, and food security the same as on the back of COVID. So do you feel like those pressures are coming when it comes to potash?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, potash is smack in the middle of all this geopolitical tension, right? So when you think about it, 35% of potash comes from two countries right in the middle of a conflict right now, Russia and Belarus. Another 10% comes from Israel and Jordan, another conflict area. But the rest of the world imports and consumes potash. Now, some of our panel members already touched on it. We haven't seen this type of realignment of supply chain since the fall of the Soviet Union and ascent of China as the major player. Now the whole thing is changing, but what does it mean for us as junior miners? Frankly, to me, that's a pure opportunity. Because if the country itself does not align its own foreign policy, very, very, I would say, in an isolationist way, meaning that, I'm going with the West or China or Russia or whatever, then you have an opportunity. Then you're in the right jurisdiction. What we like about Gabon, where our potash project is that it's a francophone country, obviously in the French-speaking area, but at the same time, they joined the British Commonwealth about 3 years ago now, and they have very good relations with China. So it is not mutually exclusive that you have to have one or the other. I mean, it all depends on the strategic intent of your investor, whether they really want to get supply or they're really after financial return. And this is not the first time we're dealing with it. Our previous project in Africa was in Ethiopia. We had International Finance Corporation, a multilateral, as an investor. We had a large PE fund from the US as an investor. We had a Chinese PE fund as an investor. So you would think, well, how's that work? Well, guess what? Their interests were aligned. In the end, we sold the company to a Middle Eastern potash producer. So here you go. So I see this as an opportunity. In potash specifically, we're in Gabon, in a geopolitically neutral area. We can supply Africa, which is very important, and we can, of course, supply Brazil, which is the largest potash producer. But overall, I think there's a huge interest in potash because a lot of buyers right now want to diversify away, not only from Russia and Belarus, but even from Canada. Because think about it, 70% comes from these three countries and have been shoving down the price down the throat of all these buyers. They want to have a neutral country that will be producing potash. So I see this as an opportunity as long as the country doesn't become antagonistic with one bloc or the other.
Thank you, Farhad. Yeah, exactly. That sort of speaks to the supply chain concentration I was talking about. There is a lot more focus on diversification of sources nowadays across the board. But also I wonder, so where you have, I guess there's an advantage for junior miners where there's a diversification play because they can invest in somewhere where it sort of gives them an alternative source. But are you seeing also any sort of talks about vertical integration? I was in DC a few months ago and was talking to some of the big multinationals, and they're looking to secure supply chains vertically, kind of straight down to the mine, to be sure that they can produce the EVs or whatever may be the case. Do you see that as a sort of changing the landscape of traditional financial corporation and EP, maybe, I don't know, rest of your...
Absolutely. I think most African countries are looking for their mining companies to go downstream in country and extract more of the value that would often go offshore into refiners in other parts of the world. back into the home country in Africa. However, that requires capital, skills, other materials that aren't always easily available in some of those countries. So I think it is a challenge. I think it was Errol. He ducked pretty quickly there. I think it was Errol that talked about offtake. And, you know, in our case, we're in an industry that's 90% controlled by China, rare earths in our case. And the reality is, if we're to get funded, the only way to do it is to have an offtake agreement with someone in China. And as I keep saying to people, it's only for a limited period of time. 7 years in our case will go, in the blink of an eye once we get moving. But not only that, if we go further downstream in country, we don't have to supply all of our offtake to China. We're allowed to move a good deal of that elsewhere. So look, there are ways to manage this, but when you're in the sector that we happen to be in, rare earths, the only game in town for a while yet is China. I know America is trying to get some things moving with some mining companies there, and we'd love to align ourselves with a few of those, but we have to deal with the reality. We also just talked about having other opportunities. We also have a lot of phosphate, and we happen to be in a part of Tanzania where there's a lot of agriculture, which is to your potash story, and that's a balance of payments problem for Tanzania. They import most of their phosphate. So, as a project, we have to get our rare earths up and going. That's the main game. But here's a really good deposit of phosphate sitting on our mining tenement area that we've got a license to work on, and that will help the Tanzanian economy quite substantially. So we need to have an eye on all of those different opportunities. But the main game is rare earths in our case, and that's right in the middle of a geopolitical and deeply developing argument right now.
Thank you, Russell. And maybe to Jed and Errol, do you see big multinational companies trying to also push down push upstream, actually, to sort of go all the way to the mine, like automotive companies, EV companies? Are they trying to get straight to the source of the...
In our situation, not as yet. Not as yet. We have a unique situation where we're shipping a concentrate all the way to China to be smelted, and we've got a smelter 100 kilometers north of us. So we have this peculiar situation where we would love to do more, to go further downstream in country, but we've actually been prevented by cost. It's higher treatment charges 100 kilometers up the road than it is to put all of my concentrate on a truck, get it to port, put it on a ship, and get it all the way to China and smelt it there. And I think that kind of speaks to some of the challenges that we're talking about, is that there's the desire for a lot of downstream development, but sometimes not the actual ability. I think in our situation, it's something that will change, but I think it's a bit of a metaphor for a lot of what's troubling the high idea of more development in country.
Errol, different in South Africa?
Yeah, I think there's an interesting paradigm shift happening. We are seeing the EV companies and the OEMs trying to get direct access right at mining level in these projects. We're fortunate because we've got this ridiculous geological endowment that we've got 14 critical metals on our mining rights. So although our headline is we are copper mining company, we've got copper, zinc, nickel, copper, cobalt, PGE mineralization, we've got tungsten, we've got lithium, we've got coltan, all on our mining rights. So we are a smorgasbord and we're spoiled for choice. But as a result, we've been seeing some very interesting discussions coming out of the MSP unit, this special unit that's been put together to try secure critical minerals for the global north or for the west, whichever you want to call it. But what's really interesting is the technology shifts that are being introduced, particularly by the Scandinavian countries who are playing a role in this. And I think what you see, what's happened in Indonesia with nickel, is going to permeate to the rest of the mining world as such. There's new technologies available, and old smelters, these big old belching things that consume lots of hydrocarbons, high energy consumption, high water consumption, that's going to be consigned to history in the next decade or 2 decades. So that is changing. So you're getting high technology, hydromet, you're getting metal vapor technology refining, which we've been very involved in. And that's where your OEMs are trying to get involved. They're trying to bring technology so that they can bring local refining and taking it up to precursor level and usable level, and not actually transporting bulk commodities across the planet anymore, because it's an expensive game. Let's face it, none of us as explorers and miners want to be exporting stuff across the planet. It's ludicrous. It's a financial reality that's forced on us. And the more that we can do locally, we will. And I very often say to our minister in South Africa and to the president is, you want to force mining companies to do beneficiation. Stop using the rod and start using the carrot. Use some of these massive royalties that you charge on exporting raw materials, raw minerals across the planet, and invest in actually putting the refining technology at home, and we would all supply into it. And a country like South Africa, you know, when you put up your map there, you see all these minerals that are produced in South Africa, and significant control of world supply chains of those minerals. But all the minerals are supplied in that whole Southern African region. And if the Southern African countries can actually link together and do something proactive and responsible and create a beneficiation hub, you watch what the explosion that will bring about in exploration and mine development. So it's a synergistic thing that can happen. But everybody wants to play their own game in their own corner. And unfortunately, these 4 big powers are polarizing, as I said earlier. They're trying to get control of governments and the government's supply chain.
Yeah, there is a lot of tension in the will to create that local capacity. Let's face it, unfortunately. It is the old story of Africa, isn't it?
I just wanted to add to that you know, in the case of potash, we're in a unique situation, whereas, you know, we have to go all the way to the end product, so we have to do all the processing. So before we get involved with the project, we have to make sure that infrastructure is available, at least it will be available, and the government is supportive, because if a junior takes on significant infrastructure build-up, it's just not going to make any sense economically. So in Gabon, you know, the project happens to be right on the coast, which is very unique because most of these potash projects actually happen to be smack in the middle of continents. And the port itself is only 60 kilometers away. And the port is being expanded at the, you know, basically the cost of the government, so we don't have to contribute to it. And I think that's critical because if you don't have to, you know, basically if you have to sell concentrate or anything, now you have in this permanent tug of war with the government, where you're adding that value. In our case, we don't have to have that discussion, which is helpful. Having said that, if you look further down, although we do sell, you know, what we call standard MLP, or we'll be selling it, there's an opportunity to integrate with blending facilities down the road, with fertilizer blending facilities and NPK blending facilities, including in this region and in Europe and in Africa itself. So some of our off-takers may be not actual direct users of potash, but the blending facilities as well. So, and we want to actually keep all of that in-house in Africa, so to speak. So, you know, even when we sell to NPK blending facilities, we want to choose them either in West Africa, or the farthest we go is this region, the Gulf region.
Good point on that. Also, of course, Africa is still working on creating its infrastructure to connect Africa together, which is part of the question as well, but we've seen a bit more progress on that. Just to pick up on sort of the beneficiation as you talk, maybe go to Don first. Do you see when, of course, there's a lot more requirements, I think we all agreed on companies, mining companies, to do well by the communities, the environment, the government, everyone around. Do you see that adds value? Clearly, it gives you a license to operate locally, but does it give you value to the financiers who talk about clean energy, ESG, what have you? Does it really pay off when you're kind of showing that you've invested locally? And
I think it's a component of any investment scenario that we support the local communities, the local country. Mark Bristow from Barrick, he sort of points it out very clearly over the last few years, is that about 50% of any sort of revenue should go to the company and 50% to the country. And I think that's a good balance, because you need a sufficient amount of revenue to keep the country engaged, and you need a sufficient amount of revenue to keep the company returning sufficient value to shareholders. The community and social engagement and environmental and balance is part of that equation to the same idea. I think for gold and gold projects like we're involved in, it's a balance, but it's in a different way than metal and or other commodities. And but the same sort of equation, is all the way across the board, that we need to think holistically, and we need to educate governments and the people we deal with that there has to be a balance. And if it's pushed too far one way, it's like a pendulum. Okay, that week my credit card goes to a different country. The week after, my credit card comes back. The capital is flexible. We can go where the investment is, and if the investment scenario is not permissive, then we don't go.
Anyone wants to add on that? Jed, I saw you shake your head. So to be clear, it obviously pays off to invest in local communities and create local capacity. I think we all believe that that is the right thing to do. But does that really kind of give you brownies when you need brownie points, when you need to go to the investors, and do they act on that?
So far in our development, it's been a big part of how we've developed our operation. We had to restart an old operation. There was a town around the operation that had kind of been abandoned. It didn't fit in any political jurisdiction, so we actually had to. We're still trying to get a mayor for our town. So we're setting up the political system, I guess. We collect the garbage, clean the streets, and all of the rest. That's how things go. Does it actually turn around into, like, I think there was much lauded ideas of ESG investment. I'd say we're doing a whole lot ESG-wise, but I wouldn't say it's attracted new dollars. That said, it's absolutely necessary. This is how this industry has to act. We have to be good citizens. We have to look at development before and during our mining, and also life after our mining. And if you don't, then you end up not being able to operate at all. And I'd say we've done a good job, as good as a small company can. I sometimes feel like I'm the mayor when I'm in town.
Say, maybe.
But as far as there being a wealth of new capital coming from ESG-focused investors, given what we're doing on the ground, copper being a green metal, no, I haven't seen that.
Yeah, I think that there is a disjointment, right, between the rhetoric and the reality on.
Yeah, and I think I think there is, for many of us, an issue with infrastructure in a lot of these countries. I know in our case, we are 5 hours from the nearest big town, or decent-sized town, and it's a tortuous journey to get to the mine site. But the village that we are alongside, there's about 10,000 people in that village, and we've quadrupled the GDP, if you like, of that village just by putting a road in to our mine site, because that village can now get their barley and their maize and whatever other crops they're mining out in trucks rather than horse and cart. And so that's made a massive difference to that village. So much so that when we signed our mining license agreement with the government and the president of Tanzania, which was beamed on national television, the whole village erupted in applause when we signed and held up the signed agreements, because it's good for them in a whole lot of different ways. Education, we've put schools in, we're building houses for teachers to come into the village. We've managed to get the grid into the village. All of these things, and we haven't even started building the mine yet. So, but you don't get any recognition of that with investors, unfortunately. And it's also true that I think throughout much of Africa, it's the big powers like China and some in the Middle East who are building the major infrastructure, the railways, the highways, Dubai ports in Tanzania and others. And I think that has to change, that there has to be much more local involvement in that. It needs capital, of course, but we've all got to find ways to do that.
Thank you, Russell. I will cut another question, but we're probably going to go over. Any particular questions from the room before we close up? Probably closing your keep on time. Amy will be grateful. Thank you so much. A real pleasure to have you all here. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.